Hey guys, this is Casey, Kane, and Jacqueline, and our project is on the representation and discrimination within queer diversity. We're going to start off by talking about the ideal queer person used to represent the stereotype. This person is usually white, gay, cisgender male, and young. When anyone mentions the queer community, typically the first image that comes to your mind is a youthful gay white man. They're the least marginalized of the queer community, so they're the ones that are most accepted and represented. This is despite a variety of people that belong and identify within the community. It is such a narrow idea of who is queer and sends a message to those that do not fit in that they don't belong and that they're wrong.
Even within the community, people can experience discrimination or exclusion, and that happens when people do not meet the ideal face for the community. So, like, if they're attracted to multiple genders, such as bisexual or pansexual individuals, they experience hostility because of monosexism, which is the idea that people can only be attracted to one gender, which is not true. And it is very hurtful for those individuals because then they feel excluded, they feel like they don't belong. Genderism is more unintentional. It refers to people who don't fit within the gender binary. So non-binary, gender fluid, agender individuals, they feel excluded because the terms and labels that were made for the community, those are gender dependent, like gay and lesbian. That refers to men who love men and women who love women, and that doesn't apply to non-binary, agender, gender fluid individuals. Not being LGBTQ enough, that's for straight passing individuals, so people who are LGBTQ, but when you look at them, you might not know that they are LGBTQ. So bisexual individuals that happen to be dating the opposite gender, they experience hostility because they can be seen as straight. They have that advantage, they have that privilege. Hetero-romantic asexuals also have that privilege because they are attracted romantically to the opposite gender. So when you see them out with their partner, you're not going to know that they are asexual.
Adding to the exclusion in the queer community, they almost always face race and gender discrimination. People of color are stereotyped to be aggressive or violent or masculine, which then directly conflicts with the idea that gay or lesbian is a feminine or womanly thing. Also, fetishization of race and sexuality has turned into a sort of taboo thing to be shown, as if those queer groups are inherently sexual or for only sexual purposes.
In this slide, we will talk about how some movies influence queer communities. Some media outlets, like movies, not only discriminate against the queer communities, but also a majority of them focus primarily on CIS men, leaving trans people and CIS women out in the cold. To demonstrate, the show Heartstopper is once again a love story about white gay teenagers, Charlie Spring and Nick Nelson. This show features a great representation of gay white teenagers, but it demonstrates how other LGBTQ communities are underrepresented in the media. Another example is Steven Universe, as a lot of people dislike how the creator made concepts of fusion, in which two of the show's creators combine into one person, as a novel way to explore queer relationships. In order to avoid controversy, the show's producer ordered the creator to cease the relationship between those characters, as a majority of TV shows avoid queer relationships.
Mainstream LGBTQ advertisements usually feature two white gay men and occasionally two white lesbian women, but that's the extent of LGBTQ representation by large corporations. And even during Pride Month, when there's a huge proliferation of corporations that come out as pro-LGBTQ, it is purely for good press because they don't really do anything to help or support the community beyond creating a certain kind of media that they know people will consume and that will make them consume their products in turn.
Here's some basic examples of media that exclude queer communities, especially when they're trying to promote the queer community. In basic movies and shows, there's Heartstopper, Adventure Time, Steven Universe. In everyday use of social media, there's exclusion in TikTok, Tumblr, Pinterest, and Twitter. And then a lot of stores and companies' advertisement excludes people outside of the stereotype, like Macy's and Campbell's Soup, for example. Majority of these only include the stereotypes or just a youthful gay white man because they're the most accepted.
In this slide, we will talk about how some movies influence queer communities. Some media outlets like movies not only discriminate against the queer communities, but also a majority of them focus primarily on CIS men, leaving trans people and CIS women out in the cold. To demonstrate, the show Heartstopper is once again a love story about white gay teenagers, Charlie Spring and Nick Nelson. This show features a great representation of gay white teenagers, but it demonstrates how other LGBTQ communities are underrepresented in the media. Another example is Steven Universe, as a lot of people dislike how the creator made concepts of fusion, in which two of the show's creators combine into one person, as a novel way to explore queer relationships. In order to avoid controversy, the show's producer ordered the creator to cease the relationship between those characters, as a majority of TV shows avoid queer relationships. In this slide, we'll talk about how social media influences the queer community. Social media has evolved into a platform for knowledge sharing. Because of the user base's diversity, we observe a more diverse LGBTQ community. Because the members of this community post information about themselves and others online, Pinterest is a site where posts from other social media platforms are reposted, increasing the visibility for those people because even if you don't use those platforms, you can still view the content on Pinterest. Pinterest usually uses content from Tumblr or Twitter. These creators can talk about their experience and offer others words of wisdom or encouragement on video-based social media platforms like TikTok. On TikTok, there is a friendly group of senior gay men known as the Old Gays, who frequently engage with their followers, one another, and other creators. Another TikToker, a transgender woman named Summer Luke, frequently records videos about her transitioning process, her challenges, her past, and her family. This allows other trans people to know that they're not alone and have someone to connect with.
Mainstream LGBTQ advertisements usually feature two white gay men and occasionally two white lesbian women, but that's the extent of LGBTQ representation by large corporations. And even during Pride Month, when there's a huge proliferation of corporations that come out as pro-LGBTQ, it is purely for good press because they don't really do anything to help or support the community beyond creating a certain kind of media that they know people will consume and that will make them consume their products in turn.
In this slide, we'll be discussing the standpoint theory. The standpoint theory refers to the way in which you perceive the world from your own point of view. It uses an expressive method that focuses on people's unique experiences based on their social position, such as gender, race, and/or social class. The image in front of you is called The Blind Man and the Elephant. This image illustrates how perceptions of the same situation can vary depending on who is looking at it. As people only see one singular part of the elephant, not the elephant as a whole, or as where you're standing determines how you see things. As you see, it is possible for a person's point of view to be totally different from yours, which can then lead to some conflicting opinions. In the next slide, we'll discuss how the sampling theory influences the queer community.
The lack of queer representation definitely influences standpoint theory. If a person is not exposed to different views of queer people, especially from outside the community, then they begin to create stereotypes in their head relating an image to a queer person. The media influences this because they're only expressing a queer person in their views of the ideal person rather than showcasing the reality of the community. This not only influences people's views from outside the community, but to be a part of it yourself and not see any representation that reflects you can lead someone to feel insecure, out of place, and even increase anxiety and depression. Creating a more diverse media that positively represents the queer community can result in many people feeling more confident, safe, and even reduce the feeling of exclusions.
This is an organization called Therapy for Queer People of Color. It's exactly how it sounds. Queer people of color can receive high quality mental health care through this organization, and it is nonprofit, and it is staffed with psychologists, counselors, and social workers, and they specifically look into social justice, anti-racism, and each client's intersectional identities. And this is really, really important because queer people already experience trauma related to them being queer, and on top of the intersecting identity of their race, it is so important that they do get some sort of therapy, some sort of counseling that can help them through the process.